What are the crown jewels that these adversaries would look to attack?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and I also agree with John that there are different levels of organizations here. So it's a different problem for the biggest organizations in the country and the world. And as John says, that's really about complexity and trying to get your head around and get visibility of your entire space. Increasingly, I think for everybody else, including some quite large SMEs, the answer has got to be some form of managed security service, because the thing we haven't touched on so far is skills.
Yeah.
What these groups are very good at is they have the right skills.
Yes.
And it's very hard for us to acquire those skills in that mid-market. And I think that's a problem, and increasingly for government as well, organizations that are below the biggest are going to have to outsource this. It'll probably be cloud-based, and there are some great cloud offerings now. So there are plenty of people who can help, as Steve and John have both said. But really, when I look at, I'm dealing with some ransomware cases recently, and when I look at these companies, if only they had gone down the route of a managed security service with managed detection and response, actually they could have prevented this.
Right.
The truth, or they could have limited the damage.
Yes.
And I think the speed and complexity is such now that trying to organize this yourself is really hard unless you're in the biggest organizations, as John said.
Yeah. And Robert, could we just understand a little bit more about what that sort of attack chain looks like? What are the steps? They obviously go through an element of reconnaissance before they determine who to target. How does all that work from a cyber criminal's perspective?
Yeah, so typically there is the organized crime groups have different people doing different things. So there are the people who are targeting. In the past, it would have been the spray attacks,
Right.
and that still happens. But increasingly, they're going for particular targets who they know will pay, and they assume or know are poorly defended. And by looking from the outside, they can see how poorly defended they are, frankly, and that's a wake-up call for lots of companies.
Right.
So they will have intrusion specialists who can get the malware down. And that, again, the slightly depressing thing is these tend to be delivered through the things we've all been talking about for 20 years.
Yeah.
So it's spear phishing emails, it's failure to patch, it's IT hygiene, it's poor password management, all the stuff we've been banging on about for years.
Right.
The basics, if you like. They're delivered in that way. Once they're in first stage, second stage, they will typically take some weeks, maybe months, to look around, see what's valuable, what's monetizable, exfiltrate that data very often, because there is now this double extortion model where they don't just freeze your data and ransom it, they steal it as well. So even if you've backed up, you are threatened with, effectively blackmailed with the data being
released.
Or released, yeah. So, and then of course, right through the chain, they will have people who can exfiltrate the data, who can then monetize it, because there are lots of options. You can ransom it, you could blackmail, you could use it yourself to do fraud.
Yeah.
And then, like all criminal enterprises, they put a lot of effort into cashing out.
Yes.
That's a problem for them. And they use a mixture of, obviously, cryptocurrency, money mules, anything. It used to be, wire transfers, bank transfers, but that's got difficult for them in law enforcement intervention. So it's typically cryptocurrency and money mules, and so that's a big part of any criminal enterprise. Is how do you get the money out and launder it? Yeah, yeah. But it's a clear chain that you can see in operation.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And so, Steve, clearly we're not going to apply 100% security across an organization. And it sounds, to a point that John referred to there about trying to understand, what are those most critical assets to an organization? How can organizations go about determining what's really critical for the business?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Nick, because I think that this is where security meets the business leader.
Yeah.
The security function for me now really is much more of a consultant than it ever was before. I mean, to Robert's point, we have to confront the fact that we're going to have to outsource very much more. Well, let's think that through a little bit. We're now talking about third-party supplier management in that case.
Yeah.
We're talking about the use of cloud. You've got to really understand how data moves across your organization. Mm-hmm. And that means you have to involve your business leadership. Traditionally, they've been reluctant to get involved because security has always had this sort of perspective, going back, John, to your point, 15, 20 years, it was always the traffic cop, you can't do something. I'm not going to tell you what I'm doing because you'll prevent me doing it. So we've got to move on from that. And the way to do it, I think, is for the business to really understand just some of the issues that we've been talking about. This is about your business coming to a grinding halt.
Yes.
That is a business issue. It's not a security issue. It's a business issue.
Yeah.
And that's why boards all around the world are becoming more interested, but they're still not there yet. We still haven't got that level of maturity or understanding, and a lot of them are still very afraid because it's a technical issue. And it's interesting for me when I look at different organizations to see where the security function sits in the enterprise. And increasingly, we're seeing it move out of technology, and I would say that's a good thing. Some people may disagree, but we're seeing it move very much more into the risk space.
Okay.
Enterprise risk is the ideal home, I personally happen to think.
Yes.
Because now we're starting to talk about risk management.
Yes.
Now we're much closer to understanding the way that the business needs to be operating.
Yes.
And now we can get closer to, going back to your question, really getting our hands around what we need to protect, how we need to protect it, and how we're going to respond when somebody attacks it.